Today, accompanied by Graham from the Gates Foundation, they're going to dive deeper into the how of gender intentionality and how mainstreaming gender within our organizations is going to help us have deeper and more impact on the lives of the people that we serve. So with that, I'm going to call upon Lucero to kick off this session.
Thank you for the time that you will be spending with myself and Graham today on this part 2 years later, of this journey that you've all been having to gender integration. I was extremely happy this year, both when I got that initial call from our friends in Dastra inviting my work now with the Center for Gender Equality at Stanford University to develop a new session for you. And what I heard was, we already get the what, we already get the why, everybody's asking about the how, and we would really like you to focus on the institutional piece. So really want you to focus on what it means to do the work that we're already starting to do with our programs internally. And I was very pleased with that ask because it really showed a good progression of what we know works at gender integration. And what I mean by that is this idea that, where do I point? This idea that institutional gender mainstreaming and programmatic gender integration are really two sides of the same coin. They need to happen hand in hand if we are to be successful. So whereas I somewhat agree with, do these work? I don't like being here. Does this work? Not yet. Hello? There you go. Where I certainly agree to a certain extent to the initial panel we had yesterday at the launch, that there is a lot that we still don't know about what works to create gendered impact in our programmatic work. There is some that we do know. There is some that we certainly do know from the decades that development organizations have been doing gender integration under this approach of gender mainstreaming, which in a nutshell means making sure that the way that you adopt a gender lens in your work is not marginal, making sure that it's not an afterthought, but instead making sure that it's at the heart of how you understand the problem, how you understand the change that you want to bring around, and how you approach it. And so, having said this, it should be no surprise that the institutional piece is a core component of that. You know, just like in our lives, we know the importance of consistency. We know the importance of, and if we think of our partners that talked to us yesterday about community engagement, about the importance of being able to approach a community with some level of consistency so they will actually listen to you, you know, so that we wouldn't have practices in our own home that are inconsistent with the kind of change that we're trying to advocate. This is very similar, right? We want to make sure that the policies and the structures that we have within our own organizations are consistent with the type of gender equality commitments that we're trying to see in our programmatic work. So this, in a nutshell, is what institutional gender mainstreaming is. It's the process of incorporating a gender perspective into every aspect of your organizations. Policies, strategies, the administrative functions, and perhaps trickiest of all, into the organizational culture of your institutions and the how we do things and the what's rewarded or not. And we'll spend a lot of time for the next 2 hours that we have with you unpacking each one of these aspects, and in fact inviting you to take a first initial look at how you're doing with each one of these sections. And Graham will be leading us in that example initially before lunch, and then after lunch we're actually going to workshop it. You're going to get to do some group work with some of these concepts. Um, and we do this because it offers an opportunity to examine all the aspects of our organization through that gender lens. Remember 2 years ago, we talked a lot about applying that gender lens to your understanding of an issue you're trying to affect. How do we get to safe sanitation for all? And what does it mean to think about that through a gender lens? We take that lens inwardly now, and we think about it as it applies to our organizations, because really it's a strategy for enhancing how we work from within. And it's also an opportunity to gauge how well we're doing to this commitment that we're professing externally, right? I can not tell you how many times Joshua told me they're already committed. Don't try to get them there. That's fantastic. Let's now see how your institutional processes and makeups are living up to that commitment that you've all been espousing in your sanitation work. So I'm just going to tell you a few things about this process. One of it, a very important thing, is to remember that it's both a strategic process and an organic process. It's strategic because it really challenges you to look at the root causes, at what some of the issues might be that your organizations are replicating from your own context, and what some of the root causes might be of that, so that you can identify strategies for bringing about change. So it's not a one-off or a superficial exercise. It's really something that calls us all upon to develop strategies for significant change. It's also an organic process, and very important for everyone to remember this, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all recipe that someone can bring to you to just teach you how to make your organization gender intentional. It really needs to be a process that speaks to the fabric of your organization, to the history and to the culture of your organization, and that changes along with it, that doesn't get complacent with initial, perhaps low-hanging fruit that you're able to achieve, but rather that constantly asks, what's next? How are we getting this change done? Which parts of the organization need to come in more strongly, which are doing well? So important to remember both these things for institutional mainstreaming. And with regards to why we do this, I like to think of, I'm going to show you 3 here, but there's a 4th one that's very important. So number 1 is, especially for all of you that have already started to integrate a commitment to gender integration into what you do and how you do it, integrating or embarking your organization in an internal process really shows to your staff that that you are truly committed as part of the way you do things, everyday fabric of your organization. So one way to really engage with institutional mainstreaming is to explicitly link it to the mission of your organization and show your staff that you're serious about this. Number 2 reason for doing this, sorry, I'm struggling with the pointer. And I think a lot of people that look at this process more from the pragmatic side, just like in integration, we say, when you adopt a gender lens, your impact will be that much better, faster, amplified. There is a similar argument to be done around institutional gender mainstreaming. It will make your organizations more effective. There's ample evidence for that out there, that when organizations take the systematic look at what portions of their organization need to be transformed so that they better reflect gender equality principles, they, as an organization, tend to do better, tend to be more effective, tend to increase staff happiness, and that's not a bad thing, and certainly tend to reduce staff turnover. And so this 3rd aspect is not negligible. The fact that we do institutional gender mainstreaming so that staff are better off, right? So that we really take a hard look at any issue of discrimination, internal gender discrimination that might be deeply rooted, that has been allowed to continue without examination, that might have had horrible aspects of forms of gender-based violence, such as sexual harassment or other forms of harm. So that instead you can truly and actively promote gender equality among staff. The fourth aspect that's not here, and you saw me sort of quickly address in the video that Pak Son shared with us this morning, is the issue of sustainability. And I think that's why it's so important that you all decided to include this topic today in the agenda of this APM as you're looking at scale towards sustainability. And it's the idea that when an organization starts doing successful, strong, gender-intentional work in the programmatic level, but they don't take a look inside, that change is tenuous. That change is, it's not standing on solid ground, let's say, right? That change is usually either related too closely to a funding stream or to organizational priorities that might shift tomorrow for many reasons. When you actually couple integration work with an internal exploration and a process to really root gender equality measures from within your organization, there is a much stronger likelihood that your organization will continue to do gender-intentional work in the long run, right? That the commitment is fully grounded in what you understand to be your bread and butter, not something that's seen as additional, an add-on, or something that you're just required to do as part of a compliance mechanism. So there's a very strong argument for this being a part of sustainability. One more thing that I want to share with you that might be obvious, but that does not mean it's not worth exploring. And it's the idea that I expect every organization represented in this room to have gender inequality issues. Why wouldn't you? Right? Our organizations reflect the culture that we come from. Our organizations are made up of people, that have been brought up in a society that's regulated by strong gender norms that determined what's expected of people based on their gender. So why wouldn't this be replicated in the organization? It is. And I have seen through these systematic processes of exploration enough things to expect that they're there. And I think that's a good thing to acknowledge, right? Like when we start looking inwardly, things will come up. And the process for doing institutional gender mainstreaming indeed is a very systematic process that we've been using this language this week, will leave no rock unturned, no cupboard unopened, and trust me, things will come out. And so it's important to be prepared for that. When we work on gender intentionality at the programmatic level with you, we always say it's really important to anticipate risk, to anticipate what might come of the work that you're going to do. Yesterday in the beginning panel, we heard about gender-based violence increasing in association with a nutritional program, and what do we do about that? And so because we're looking at our internal fabric, I think it's really important to know and to accept issues will be there. Let's just be prepared to have a response and to have a commitment, especially to our staff who are going to be opening up to share these things with us in a way that reassures or assures them that your organization is serious about this. And I learned from my friend Krishnan that you all like quotes. Or at least that it's common to bring in quotes into the work that we do. And so I couldn't help myself And I was reminded of very wise words of, of Gandhiji that in our part of the world are usually paraphrased into be the change that you want to see. But I understand that's not truly what was in his writing, but that what it was is, we but mirror the world. All the tendencies present in the outer world are to be found in the world of our body. If we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. And that, in a nutshell, is what institutional mainstreaming is about. It's recognizing that our institutions mirror the tendencies of gender inequality of the societies where we live, and that it is up to us to take that really brave step to start changing from within. And also in his words, we need not see what others do. And in Madhu's very wise words, you need to fail a lot to gain a lot, right? Like if you're not failing enough, you're not doing enough. So just to understand, issues will be there. We'll start uncovering them. There's lots of lessons learned about what works to integrate gender effectively and to truly promote gender equality within your organizations. We'll share some examples of that. But ultimately, what I want you to remember is that just as we know that organizations are made of people, and those people create the policies and reinforce or question the unwritten norms that guide our behavior, when we're talking about institutional gender mainstreaming, we have to keep our eye on both the kind of institutional change that we want to promote, but also the individual change within the organizations. Both these things need to come together, well supported, in order for this to be successful. Because just like with the work that the foundation has done to create a continuum for integration into programs, and I'm sure you've all heard of unintentional, intentional, and transformative, organizations also walk along a continuum, both as organizations or the people that make them up, right? And so what we have is that, perhaps while some organizations are just beginning to accept that, yes, there is a very strong link between gender inequality and barriers to the sector change that we want to see, or gender equality measures and being successful in, for example, increasing people's access to safe sanitation. Other organizations might already be very actively promoting, for example, women's empowerment. And that continuum is visible in this room today. I am so grateful to EMC and CFAR for the workshop that they put together yesterday and for really bringing all these voices that we don't usually hear. I've been coming to some partner meetings for the sanitation team, and it was truly eye-opening to hear the voice of, I'm going to try to do this justice, Poranti and Rajita and Mumtaz and Kensha. And really, yeah, I mean, they really need to have that shout out, because ask them what works to change gender norms. You know, another very important quote that I would bring is listen more and talk less. And it's kind of not good for me to be saying that, because I'm just talking up here nonstop, apparently. I'm almost done in this initial conversation. But they have obviously been negotiating power at the local level, both within their own self-help groups, within their families. The story that one of you shared about how you had to negotiate power with your mother-in-law particularly resonated with me. That this is something that we all can relate to. Well, most of us can relate to. And the idea is how they've come up with strategies to both create collective identity, the idea of their uniforms and how proud they are to wear them, but also to stand up in the last of a panel because you just can't hold on to a truth that you believe in and want to share it with the group. There is so much knowledge there that can really guide our work. in terms of the institutions that we need to be to truly support the empowerment and the change in the communities that we want to see. So thank you so much for doing that, and let's hope that we can really walk together across this continuum, because truly, and here is just some draft language. This is not yet a foundation tool. Indeed, the foundation has focused mostly on integration to programs. But if we think about organizations in a similar continuum, I think what we can say is you as organizations are somewhere along here. You're either still not really recognizing the impact that gender has in your own internal dynamics and how your policies may or may not be supporting that, and how women and men may or may not be feeling equally valued. And that would make you unintentional. You're not really thinking about these issues yet. Or maybe you're a further step and you are already recognizing it. There has been some inwardly looking process to surface what some gender gaps might be in institutional resources, whether that be a pay gap or the way that people are valued, or the space that men and women take up in meetings and how women's opinions are heard vis-a-vis men's opinions, et cetera. That's, potential gaps that you're focusing on closing. Or maybe you're closer to the transformative space where you're actually focusing on transforming gendered power relations within your organization. So this is a very simplified, I heard yesterday in the philanthropic conversation that we like to keep it simple. So in a very simple framework, you're either not thinking about this, acting to change the gender gaps in access, so what we actually have as women and men workers, or you're acting to change the gendered power relations, which, trust me, we all have in our organizations. So in order to start mapping where you all are, we're going to do an exercise using an analysis framework for organizations. I should give credit to Interaction, which is an organization in the United States that developed this framework that has been very widely used internationally to take a look at not projects, but organizations and how well prepared they are to do this work externally and internally. So Graham is going to lead us through an initial approach to this tree. I'm going to come back then and talk to you a little bit more about methodology. And then after lunch, you'll all have an opportunity to dive more deeply into the tree as a tool.
All right. Thank you, Lucero. And I'll start by saying a couple things. First, for the next half an hour, I'll ask that everyone get their cell phones ready, because we're going to be doing some polling. So not to tweet or send WhatsApp messages, but to poll, because we're going to go through some questions. And for those of you that I don't know, I've had the pleasure of meeting many of you in the room, but I'm Graham Sneed from the Gates Foundation, and the WASH team and I have been going through kind of this gender mainstreaming process at the foundation for the last 3 years and working closely with Lucero on it. So I'm going to walk through the framework that she talked about and give some examples of how it's manifested itself at the foundation. But really, the goal for this session is to be able to have you all start the process of looking at your organizations and doing some of this gender mainstreaming on your end, and we'll just provide some tools to be able to do that and recognize that we at the foundation are going through it kind of concurrently. And so with that, I'll kind of get into the tree, and I think it's actually very appropriate that the framework we're using is a tree, because if you remember, Nina this morning said, I think trees help was her comment around water and raising the water table, and so trees help, forests help, and so of the 40 some odd organizations that are in the room. If we all start working on this tree and building ourselves into trees, then we'll have 40 trees, and I think that qualifies as a forest. And so we'll raise the collective water table of gender mainstreaming, I think is the analogy. So we'll go with that. And with that, we'll get into the first, oh gosh. Pretend we didn't see this. Well, the first branch is political will, if I can get back to it. There we go. So political will. So political will represent the roots of the tree. And so I'm no botanist, but the roots are what draw up all the nutrients from the soil. They're the important part of the tree. They let the tree grow, support all the branches, and so it's political will is what represents the roots, and really the most important part in that process. And it's firm and visible intention or commitment of leadership. Strong political will when publicly supported for gender mainstreaming really helps an organization move it forward. And from a foundation perspective, this obviously comes from the top with Melinda Gates obviously championing the, women and girls and moving both in our external programming and at the foundation itself. And that moves down to the president of our division, Roger, to Brian, our director, who spoke earlier, who's signed on to a pledge not to participate in any manels and says that publicly, and often talks about the work that we're doing on gender mainstreaming. Here's a fun question: if you've heard Madhu Krishna speak about gender and gender mainstreaming publicly, please raise your hand. Okay. I mean, she did it here yesterday, so really everyone should. And so she, as a leader of WASH and a leader of our organization, speaks publicly about it, and that really allows the rest of us on the team to be able to take the process forward and to really commit to gender mainstreaming, because we know that our leaders are on board. So I think that's a positive example, but what I would like you to do is turn this to some more introspection, and so take 2 minutes at your table to discuss with people how you think your organization is doing when it comes to political will for gender mainstreaming. No matter where you're, if it's something that is important to your organization, something that you've started or not, where do you think the leaders of your organization fall on gender mainstream? Just a quick discussion of that, and then what we'll do is have you fire up the app, and we'll have you vote on a scale. It's actually 1 to 5, I think, on the app. To what extent is political will on gender equality visible in your office? And we'll take a look at those results. So 2 quick minutes for discussion, and then we'll take a look at the voting results. So if you all get out your cell phones and vote, then we'll take a look at it. 2 quick minutes. Talk about political will. Okay, everyone, please remember to vote. Looks like we've got 24. And just to reiterate that political will and what the tree and the roots represent is really leadership of your organization. And I gave an example of a couple leaders from the Gates Foundation, but when you think about political will, it's really something that needs to come to the top, from the top. So keep that in mind as you discuss. Okay. All right, let's bring it back together. Hopefully you got a nice glimpse into how organizations are viewing and practicing political will. If we look at the poll results very quickly, it looks like we have a good amount of organizations voting that they're very visible, that leadership in their organization is promoting gender equality and gender mainstreaming in a very visible way. So I'd say that's great. And one thing to keep in mind is something that Lucero referenced is sustainability of gender mainstreaming. And if you have political will, if you have buy-in from your leaders, then it's much easier to maintain. A lot of times when it's ground up, there will be 1 or 2 champions at lower levels that are promoting visibly, but if they leave an organization, then that momentum is likely to leave with them. So having political will is very important. The roots of the tree, raising that water table. Okay, so are we ready to move on? Let's get to the branches. we'll have plenty of more. So this is just scratching the surface of the tree and of the framework. And so if we could go back to the slides, we'll move on. But we have like an entire workshop planned this afternoon for you all to get deeper into these discussions. So don't worry, we'll come back to it if this felt short. First branch of the tree is technical capacity, and so this is really I mean, if you are at an organization and you want to start thinking about working in, and I'm like slowly moving closer to you guys just because I feel so formal up on the stage. But if you want to start working in any area, like when the foundation first wanted to start working in sanitation, they're like, okay, let's bring in experts. Well, gender mainstreaming is no different. You want to be able to have a strong technical capacity, and that can manifest itself in many ways. The foundation in particular, we have committed a lot of time, the WASH team specifically, to building technical capacity through Lucero and her team, doing trainings for staff, bringing in external speakers, and really working on committing some of our time to gender mainstreaming, which has helped increase our technical capacity and has increased our understanding of what it takes to mainstream gender within our organization. And the foundation at a larger level is also very committed to that and is starting to, it's really about committing resources to gender mainstreaming and leveraging that political will that we just talked about into something demonstrated, to committing resources to saying, our leaders are serious about this, we're serious about this, we're going to take the time to listen to technical experts, we're going to take the time to have our staff trained, and we're going to take the time to move this forward because it's important to us. And so expanding technical capacity and as the organization changes, having the staff employees at all levels learn and change with it. And so we'll do, I guess, a similar thing now. Take a quick 2 minutes. Let's talk about the technical capacity at your organization, and how you're doing. If you've developed gender tools and methodologies for mainstreaming, and where you feel your organization lands on this on this kind of spectrum on this issue. And so we will also vote again, but take a quick 2 minutes to discuss your table and talk about your organization's technical capacity. Then after discussion, vote, and we'll come back together.
Can you give some example of this gender tools or gender methodology in the technical capacity that you were mentioning?
Yeah, so from I guess from the WASH team perspective, what we have done is just at the foundation go through trainings on gender that really start like from the beginning, and so look at biases that we all might hold and how they manifest themselves in an organizational capacity, and what we can do to be aware of them and overcome them, so I guess like as we think about the technical capacity, there are a lot of tools I think that exist. And part of what we'll get into in the workshop in the afternoon is kind of exploring where your needs might be, and then we can kind of share those tools and examples as we go, if that's okay. Good. Okay. Does anyone else have a quick example of a positive example of technical capacity building that their organization has done that they'd like to share? Okay, if not, we've got one. All right. So I'm actually going to hold on to the mic to make sure that we're able to move on. But here,
Clearly, you anticipate me going on forever, but we do have gender analysis capacity. We have it in our London office. We're building that capacity in every office. So we have tools, we have methodologies. We're bringing it into every program we do, and we've created a network of gender champions in every country office, which can include, cross teams. So they're program teams as well as, administration. Anybody who wants to sign up can be a gender champion and push for it in their workspace.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. So potentially an opportunity to share some of the methodologies you've developed with other organizations here to help build capacity. Excellent. And it looks like we may, actually, if we can go back to the results very quickly, it looks like we are like 1, 2, and 3. Am I reading that right? Yeah. So it looks like there might be some work to do on technical capacity building within organizations. And so as we move into in the workshop in the afternoon, when you think about what you can commit to as an organization coming out of this, is maybe it looks like doing some things around technical capacity may be high on the priority list for many of your organizations. And so we'll work to develop that this afternoon. But with that, I think we can move on to the organizational culture, the next branch of the tree for gender mainstreaming. And really, when I hear organizational cultures, there are what it says on the slides, like the values and the ways that people interact within an organization, and taking what, at least at the Gates Foundation, we've learned about biases and applying that to policies and having a gender balanced staff and governance, valuing equally men and women in the workplace, and having zero tolerance for discrimination based on gender, sexual harassment, and gender-based violence. And so those are big parts of organizational culture that should be addressed and overcome when it comes to gender mainstreaming. But there's also this concept of within a culture and an organization of this is how we do things, right? And as you, I think it dovetails nicely with building capacity, and as you build that capacity, and as you, as a staff, as an organization, recognize the issues that Lucero talked about within your organization, it's known that those things that may traditionally exist, which like not having a gender balanced staff, or not valuing men and women equally, or if a woman is outspoken in a meeting, not valuing that as much as a man who is outspoken in a meeting. So stuff like that, knowing that those biases exist and saying that's not how we operate here. That's not how we do things, and having the organizational culture that promotes equality and promotes recognition that these things exist and that you're working to overcome them. And I do actually have kind of an interesting WASH example, and I'll give you a little peek behind the curtain here. We have at the foundation we have a WASH team WhatsApp group, and one of our colleagues shared an article the other day, and I'll just read the title of the article, and it says, "A robot read 3.5 million books to find we describe women by appearance and men by virtue." And so there was an article about how an organization used machine learning to read 3.5 million books, and it kind of cataloged the adjectives used to describe men and to describe women. And the adjectives used to describe women were all about appearance, and the adjectives used to describe men were all about virtue. And so my colleague recognized this as a way that gender norms are socialized, something that he learned about through our capacity building, and found it interesting that like this article was written about it, and thought that the team would find it interesting too, which he was right, and he shared it with all of us. And so from the kind of the concept of this is the way we do things, I think it was a great example of all of us learning about the things that might contribute to gender inequality, taking them seriously, and working to, as an organization, working to overcome them and change in the way that we operate. And so I thought that was cool. But now let's talk about how you think you all are doing organizationally as a culture when it comes to mainstreaming gender. And so same process, have a little chat, we'll vote, and then come back together.
Just two observations in
Please.
terms of organizational culture and being part of the wider, reflecting the wider, shall we say, the predicaments and dilemmas. So two things that, we, in the Indian context, the intersectionalities are very critical. Both class, caste, identities are very, very critical. So if you just look at the gender binary, you don't get far at all. Point number one. Even a consortium like this or a collaboration like this does not reflect diversity at all. You may get a fairly good mix of men and women. You may even get a bit of predominance of women in some bits of it, but that doesn't reflect gender balance or, an affirmation of gender, at least in our context. So when we are working, even as a civil society organization, you may be, shall we say, having technical capabilities or, mobilization, whatever, you're working with the communities, unless you reflect it organizationally, you devolve what is called ownership, intellectual property, to the people who are actually making things happen, who are actually, shall we say, doing the last mile, transformation. Then it doesn't become, it doesn't become an example of, gender transformation.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments. Okay. More just 2 minutes per discussion. We'll still have, and then we'll come back. We'll come back together, and then similar voting activity. Okay. Cool. If we could get back to the slides, recognizing that I think everyone in the room feels as though their organization is doing well on culture, and so that's good, and I think that's a good manifestation of political will where it exists, and culturally having that branch of the tree grow strong. So that's great. So if we can come back together, we'll move on. We have two more branches to discuss, and then we'll get you to lunch, and then on to the more fun kind of the workshop part of it. Oh gosh, here we go. Okay, next branch is accountability, and so we've gone through technical capacity, political will, organizational culture, and if you have all of those things, that's obviously an excellent start. But really, what you want to be able to do ultimately is hold your organization accountable for executing on the commitments that they've made. Oh. Hold on, I've gone to slide 2. Here we go. And holding your organization and holding your staff accountable for meeting commitments. And I mean, I think that applies to any strategic work. You set goals, you set outcomes. You say that you want to have 50% of all fecal sludge treated in India, at least by 2024, and I think we'll have Madhu holding people accountable to that. And so the same logic applies in gender mainstreaming. And so we want to, as an organization, be able to demonstrate that we're doing this for more and better reasons than like it's important to Melinda, and so we're going to have to do it. Like it's something that will, as Lucero mentioned, will help us be more successful as an organization, be more successful as practitioners in the WASH space, and be more successful in general. And so we have to show that we're walking the talk through accountability. And this applies both at an organizational level through, if you think about from an HR perspective, like using non-gendered language in job descriptions and certain policies like that, and also at an individual level when you think about like work plans and having a system of incentives and rewards for people within your organization forwarding the gender mainstreaming agenda and spending time and committing time to work on it and being rewarded for that work because like once again, like Lucero said, it will pay off in the end. And so having mechanisms for accountability to move forward gender mainstreaming. And so I think this is actually an interesting one to talk about at an organizational level. And so I'm looking forward to both in the workshop hearing about how your organizations are doing on accountability, but also right now I'm curious to hear the poll, and to hear the poll, to see the poll, to see the results of the poll, and so take a couple minutes and discuss and vote again on how you think you're doing on accountability. Okay, so let's just move. Everyone, open up your apps and let's vote. Let's take a look at the results, and then save discussion for the afternoon. How about that? Okay. So seeing a lot of 2s and 3s, and so this is lower, maybe a little bit higher than technical capacity, but maybe still on the low end. And so this afternoon when we talk about commitments and putting gender mainstreaming commitments on the commitment board outside, accountability mechanisms for your organization might be is an interesting thing to think about, and so we'll look for some of those and hopefully have good discussion about it this afternoon. Okay, one more branch to go, so let's get through that. And it is strategy and policy. And so Lucero talked about this earlier, but it's really something that's very apparent to me in the mainstreaming that we've been doing at Watch Team and kind of in the foundation writ large, is that it changes that you want to make and changes that you want to implement, at least for our organization, really won't fully take hold until they are incorporated in strategy and aligned with strategy. And so so when there are like opportunities within our strategy and our watch strategy, and many of you know this, is that we've as a part of the mainstreaming process used goals and used targets around gender to help hold ourselves accountable, like in the last branch, but also to make sure that it's really ingrained in how we operate as a team. And then also at the policy level, I mean, I referenced hiring policies and using non-gender language in job descriptions and stuff like that as a policy. But there are also other HR policies that organizationally can reinforce gender mainstreaming. And so an example of that is something I brought up earlier, but like a sexual harassment policy, most organizations have them, but a part of the mainstreaming process is really making sure that employees know about them, feel empowered to use them where appropriate. And so its policy is change that can happen slowly over time and different at each organization, but still an important part of the tree. And so with that, maybe I'll just ask for the final poll for you to rate how you think your organization is doing from a strategy and policy perspective for gender mainstreaming. So just take a second to vote. We won't discuss. Kind of sounds like some of you are discussing concurrently. That's fine. But we'll take a look at the results just so we can get a kind of a baseline for how everyone thinks they're doing, and then I'll pass it back to Lucero. Okay, these results seem to 4. So people think we're doing okay. We're doing pretty well, but obviously room for improvement on the policy. And I think once again, from a foundation perspective, the strategy and policy is always something that we can evaluate and look at to help reinforce the changes that we're making in gender mainstreaming. And so it's something that all organizations can work on, and we'll continue to do so in the afternoon. That said, back to Lucero.
Thank you, Graham, and thank you all of you for taking this first stab at taking a temperature of where your organizations lie with regard to gender intentionality. And I really mean it when I say first temperature check, because in fact, one thing that the foundation really wanted us to to communicate to you is that hopefully when you are ready to do this, when you are ready to take that really intentional look at your organizations, you will do it through a very systematic process that allows you to dig really deeply into each one of the areas of this tree and pressure test where that initial temperature coincides with both what the documentation in your organization are doing, but also very importantly how staff in your organization are experiencing these issues and what they may be able to tell you, to offer to you once they realize that there is an institutional commitment to both measuring the change that you want to do, setting some targets, and that you will put the resources behind actually bringing change about. So this is very useful as a first temperature check. We'll take another one a little more deeply in the afternoon. And then hopefully you'll all be able to figure out if and when this is something you want to do. And if it is, I'd just like to walk you through the steps that you would need to take on, and I'll do it by using an example. So one time I was asked to do this for an organization that, like many of you might come to, had increased their attention to community engagement. Understood it as a fundamental piece of unlocking the sectoral outcome that they wanted to have. And in doing so, realized that most of the people that were active in community-based organizations were women. And most of their frontline staff were men. And there was a strong disconnect there where culturally the connections were just not being made. Men had previously been charged with more technical sort of advisory services to institutional stakeholders. They really weren't the right people, nor did they have the technical capacity or the awareness to reach out to women-led community-based organizations. So a very well-meaning director instituted a policy for very fast and aggressive recruitment of female frontline staff. Here we see the nexus between programming and institutional operations. Can anybody guess what happened? Common sense. What do you think happened when an organization went from 10% women in frontline staff to 50% women in 6 months? Horrible, horrible things. Indeed, horrible, horrible things. And that's what prompted this director to say, we need some help. We need to look inside what's happening. What is it about the organizational structure that is provoking, frankly, some very overt forms of gender-based violence against the women that were brought in. So there was very strong backlash to them. So the first step was to really take a very systematic look at the organization as a whole. Where was power held? How had the privilege of male frontline staff been threatened by this sudden shift in the makeup of that team? How did the men in the organization understood and bought in to the change that this director, very strong political will director, had instituted without much prep work for the team? How had the women that had come in been prepared or not prepared for the situation that they were going to find? And how did all the interactions that they were having with each other both reflect the gender norms that they had brought with themselves and saw themselves supported or not by institutional policies to sort of raise grievance mechanisms? And unfortunately, all those things were not working so that these horrible things happened, right? So like women had backlash and they had no grievance mechanisms to go to. We documented this really well. We unfortunately uncovered how deep the issues went in terms of justifying the behavior of males in the offices and frankly, rewarding the way that they were interacting with their now female colleagues. We took a look at what others that had undergone this had done in the past that worked. And that's really important. Again, I dare to say, what do you think happened? Because it happens so much that it's almost like common sense now. But you can go out there and see what have other organizations learned from this process to create a much more gender equal workplace. We did a lot of work with prioritizing issues. We had to say to this director, you can't fix everything in 6 months. Look at what happened when you tried, right? Like it's not like this is what I need to do, just go do it, hire the women, it'll all fall into place. No, you have to actually see what some quick wins might be, what's some more structural change that needs to happen, that you have the proper resources for are, and create a set of priority issues that you're going to tackle, and for number 4, how you're going to tackle them. And very important to one of the branches that Graham told us, who's accountable for that? Like in the action plan, what type of political will do you need your leadership to exert to make staff feel like change is going to come and they can trust the process? How it's going to be done, and what the accountability measures are to have all those actions take place. And last but not least, and I think number 5, we could break up into another 10 steps, implementation, right? We can't end at having a beautiful plan. Somebody, very rightly so, was making fun of log frames yesterday, right? Like, you can have a beautiful action plan. Let's make sure that we actually have the technical capacity and the policies in place to actually implement it, and implement it in a way that's going to create better working conditions for everybody involved, and also provide the support for change behavior for those that are called upon to change. I remember in that experience, the number 1 question I always got when I would go into an office was, so are you just trying to get us all fired? You know, so is this about like deciding who meets the profile that the director now wants and getting rid of everybody else? And I think we can start from the understanding that that's never the intention. Like a gender organizational analysis process can never be about, you know, deciding who gets to stay and who gets to go. It's rather about really interpreting what has the organization done to sustain unhealthy gender behaviors that relate to gender equality, that promote gender equality, and what support does everybody in the organization need to change their understanding of what it means to interact in an organization with peers of your same or differing gender identities or gender preferences. So that's a very important thing to state. Not having said that, obviously the ultimate responsibility for the sorts of sexual harassment that the women were subjected to, that did go way up in the accountability structure, ultimately, I must say, did lead to some changes, right? And that is something that it's why political will is so important at the core of this. Like, you need to be able to take this seriously. Okay, so moving on. If and when you choose to do this, you should know that there's different ways of addressing it. And this is a process that can be done externally. So there's many experiences of something called a gender audit. Some of you might have known this. Actually, at the end of our session in the app, we're going to share a handout with some suggested toolkits and methodologies for doing this. One of them is called a gender audit, and that's usually done by an external party. So you'll contract somebody who's got very good experience doing institutional gender analysis to come in and do this, create a report and prioritize some actions, and you'll, hopefully take them on. You can do it internally, and this is, I've seen it done very well also, where it's more an internal reflection process that, if well structured and facilitated, can also, I think sometimes create a better sense of who's listening to the grievances, like some things that might come are way deeper. Perhaps that when it's an external party. Obviously, some people might object to where things are being focused and how objective the recommendations might be. And then I think there's a very successful set of examples that are more of a hybrid. So having an external facilitator really lead an internal facing process where buy-in from the staff is really built into the whole process from the beginning. And when I mean buy-in, it's about wanting to take on the actions that a review like this puts forward. But also, and I can't say this enough, it's about staff trusting the process enough to really share how they have experienced the organization, and frankly, how, up until that point, they have been negotiating gender relations on a day-to-day basis, sort of on their own, you know, thinking, I'm alone in this, I need to make the best of the situation the way it is, just as I do in the rest of, like when I do with my family and I do with my mother-in-law, I do in my office. It's that opening up that chest to really be able to share because you trust that the organization is going to take intentional steps to make things better for everyone in that group. And so something that I'm always asked, can we do this tomorrow? And it's important to right set here. I think in the experiences that I've seen, anywhere from 6 to 12 months to start a process, build political will around it. If you already have it, like some of you, so, you know, like that tree seemed really strong at the roots, how do you translate that into a process that staff is going to trust and then actually do the analysis and get to that prioritized action plan with clear accountability measures? Can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months. Obviously, that's very variable depending on the size of your organizations and the type of methodology that you determined for this. But ultimately, if we can start with a goal in mind, I just invite you to take a look at some of the things that I've seen work, that I've seen result from some of these processes. And in the case of the organization, what I was telling you about, it took some time and it took a lot of hand-holding, but eventually the women that had jumped in at the opportunity to become frontline workers for this organization found a workplace that was respectful for them, of them, that really invested in their capacity building so that they could really deliver on their work without being questioned of the credentials that they had brought to this. And a lot of the men that had been, you know, felt justified in not treating them with respect also received the support that they needed to truly question and unpack where those attitudes were coming from and start embracing different ways of interacting. And I don't want to make it rosy-colored because, you know, there was a lot of backs and forwards in the process, but I really truly stand behind the possibility of transformation through these kinds of processes because I've actually seen it happen. So I give you some time just to read these through, and after that, we are just in time to go to lunch. I believe we have 45 minutes to eat, so please make sure to be back here at 1:45 when we will take that second, more deep look, or I should say deeper look, at your treats. So I believe you're all sitting already with people from your own organization. Those of you that are not here alone, please make sure when you come back that you're sitting with anybody else who's from your organization here today. Thank you.